Hello, my name is Joshua Chipitte, and today we're going to talk about Brandon Sanderson and why I consider that this author is part of the contemporary literature. As an introduction, mention that he's you know, an author from the United States of America. He was born in 1975. He's the creator of this universe called the Cosmere, and this universe uh, comprehend a lot of his work. For instance, we have Mistborn, a book series from this universe, the Stormlight Archive, Warbreaker, and one of his most recent works is the Tres of the Emerald Sea. He also got to finish the Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time after Jordan's death, and Brandon Sanderson is one of the most influential fantasy authors of the 21st century. So to talk about this, so Anderson is not contemporary simply because he's alive, but and publishing, but because his work engaged with many of the concerns and narrative techniques associated with contemporary literature. Okay, first to understand this fragment, this first um, characteristic of the contemporary literature, we have fragmentation. To understand the fragmentation within the within Sanderson's work, we have to understand what is the Cosmere. The Cosmere is a narrative universe that Brandon Sanderson has created. You should see this universe as a galaxy. A galaxy within this galaxy we have different solar systems and a some book series from him talk about a solar system. Some others talk about or tell the story about a particular planet in a solar system. There is the first macro uh, fragmentation that we get to see. The second fragmentation, I would say that is the fragmentations of the universe itself, because we have three different layers in this universe. That is the physical realm, the cognitive realm, and the spiritual realm. In this regard, uh, well, we have the whole reality of this narrative universe uh, divided in three different layers. Then we have the multiple series, book series. So as all the stories within this universe, they also share repercussions, and they also share events. So part of uh, in part of a story that may be have been told in one of his books as from Mistborn, for example, happen to have repercussion in the Stormlight Archive because they share the universe. As micro fragmentations, we have the the multiple points of view within the stories, and these points of view can also have flashbacks or flash forwards that tell us pieces of story from the past or from the future. To understand this, you have to know that the Cosmere has uh, have had different eras. This story is not concluded, so by the time I'm recording this, Sanderson has published 5 books from the Stormlight Archive, and 5 more are expected. So at this moment, we have seen in the Stormlight Archive a story story that take place in a concrete date, and we have seen flashbacks from 6,000 years ago, or interludes that are inside the Stormlight Archive, but they correspond to another book series that take place in the future, 300 years ago, something like this. So this is how the in the different book series we have different pieces of information that can interact within can interact between them because they share a universe. And the idea of the Sanderson has explained that an example that we can look to find similarities uh, of the work that he's planning to complete is the example of the Marvel cinematographical universe, in which they have they had different series such as Thor, Captain America, Iron Man. Look at them they were as if they were different book series from the Cosmere to construct an evolution till the moment when all those stories collide. And an example of this that we have in the micro that will be the story of a singular book would be the Sunderland, that is a concept constructed by the Brandon Sanderson's community, that a concept that mixed his last name with the concept of avalanche or avalanche. Excuse me. So this Sunderland, it's how within a single story from a single book, their different point of views are elaborating the different part of a single story that will around the 70% of the book collide and give birth to the mm, climax of the book in question. So all these different point of views collide in one point, and we have as readers the climax and the conclusion of the story that's being told in that specific book. And of course, it also opens future stories for future books or books that uh, have their story in a different timeline, in the same timeline but a different time. You get what I mean. So in order to understand this fragmentation, we have two examples. The first one is Allende's logbook from the Mistborn book series, and from the first book that is called The Final Empire. So this diary was was written by Allende a millennia ago. So to contextualize a little bit about this story, in this planet, a the Lord ruler has been in power for a millennia. So the events that are related in the events that are told in this diary take us in the story, in the timeline, take us back to uh, around a millennia prior to the ruler taking the power. So it is a fragment that takes us a millennia back. The other example that we have here is the repeated prologue from the Stormlight Archive. Brandon Sanderson has published five five books from this book series, and in all the books we have the same prologue, that is the same event, but this event at this you can see there, it is the King's Gavilar assassination, and we get to see what happened in that event from, for the moment, five different points of view. And the author has confirmed that we are going to see this from other five uh, points of view, and the whole book series will have the 10 uh, points of view from the same event. The second part of this characteristic, the second characteristic of this presentation is the different voices and perspectives. In contemporary literature, often we have that it moves beyond single social viewpoints and it explores reality through multiple social positions. So that's why we have this hierarchization of parts of the society that we can see portrayed in the the stories that Brandon Sanderson has constructed. We have slaves and the ska that in a story we are going to talk about how um, these ska are a race and how are they treated in this world. But in parallel, we also have in the same book points of view, not just this from the ska, but we have points of view from the soldiers, from the scholars, from the nobles, from the kings. So we are seeing a lot of perspectives within the same story, and how these different roles relate each other in the stories. To exemplify this, we have two different examples. The left one is the Bridge Four, a group of slaves. There are they all are dark eyes, have dark eyes. I mean, and the right one, that is Jasna Collin. She's a princess that gets to, at one point she gets to be the queen, and she has light eyes. This um, division between people with light eyes and people with dark eyes is something that is structural in this planet that is called Roshar, because the condition of the iris from the eye is given at birth. So all the upper class of this society uh, were born with light eyes, and all the lower class were born with dark eyes. And the dark eyes have a system that counts to 10 social divisions, from the bottom dark eyes that are their slaves to the upper dark eyes that are the merchants, and the light eyes counts count as low light eyes that are merchants, and upper light eyes that are the monarchies. And there are not there is not any way to cheat in this system, because if someone with light eyes has uh, kids with someone that with dark eyes, the product of that union will have the this condition that is called um, heterochromy. So one eye will be dark and the other will be light eye. So it, it will be evident the condition that it's something that shouldn't happen in the society. So yeah. So here we have this idea that identity is constantly questioned and transformed and is changing. Characters are defined by who they become, not who they start as. Okay, to understand this change in identity, we have the two examples again. The first one is Vin. She's from the Miss Run series, and I will say the beginning of the story and then the end, part of the end, or something that happened uh, further in the story. So she starts as a thief and a scatter, as an slave of from plantations, and she happens to have a lot of trauma in relation of the events around why she's orphan and all of this. At the start, begins with she having 13 years old, if I'm not wrong, till the till she got to around 20 years old. So we got to see those 7 years of progression, or if progression, change, different events that shape this identity. Uh, this in this case, the change is quite big. She happens to be an slave and ends up like as a divinity of this universe. The other example is pretty similar. Kaladin was a slave in the Bridge Fort. This is from the Stormlight Archive, and as the protagonist of the first book, that is The Way of Kings, we get to see in the flashbacks from his past. He he's a he's an slave when he's around 20 years old, 19 if I'm not wrong, and the flashbacks are back to he having 8, 9 years old, and it is portrayed how he has suffered from depression from a very young age, and this neurodivergency is in part portrayed as something that is not understood by the society, medieval society that they have, something similar with the traumas uh, that face Vin along uh, her whole progression as a character. As next characteristic, we have this mental health and emotional realism when psychological suffering is treated seriously and cannot be solved through simple magical solutions. So the author in different interviews has stated that he doesn't want to give magical cures to these conditions or these issues, and that he, for every writing process, he has a team that a team of experts in in psychology and neurology and other different disability conditions. So, for instance, if we in the Stormlight Archive we happen to find a character that doesn't have mobility in part of his body, and he is in a wheelchair, and he gets access to magic, but this magic doesn't cure his illness. This magic doesn't cure his disability. So Brandon Sanderson has said that his intention with this integration of disabilities, uh, neurodivergences are are going to be part of his universe, but they won't have a magical cure in order to don't lead to this idea of that the very existence of this population is something that is wrong. So that's why there is a concept called in his universe. There is a concept that is spiritual wounds. As I already mentioned, the universe is divided in three different layers. One of them is the spiritual. So any damage that has been done in the spiritual body of someone, it's damage that remains. A brief example of this is this concept of uh, how the magic system works in this universe. The magic cannot override uh, some traits that will could consider problematic. In the case of Kaladin, his clinical depression. The author himself has stated that it is the case. Kaladin has clinical depression, and he's inside a universe or a planet that doesn't have the technological advantage to identify what depression is. So it is something that is portrayed but not understand uh, inside that portrait, but not understand inside that framework, and also that he happens to be a radiant that is people with power in this magic system. So the magic cannot heal the broken, but the magic cannot enter if there is not a fractured soul, we may say. It is said in this universe that the magic, in order to enter to a body, they must that body must have fractures uh, within their spiritual body. Remember that the universe is divided in three different layers, so the magic uh, corresponds to the spiritual layer. In in order to enter to someone, that someone must have some fractures in their spiritual body. So the magic only can enter in broken people. That that has been said by the author multiple times. The next characteristic is the social criticism, and how the fantasy in this case can be used to examine real systems of power, oppression, and hierarchy. As an example of this, well, we have the some challenges for the institutions in within the story itself, challenges for the authority, questions about hierarchy, and questions about corruption. Again, a case study of it, if we take the final empire, we have the institutionalized inequality. For a millennia, the Lord ruler controlled the religion and suppressed revolution. So that's why he got to maintain the power for a millennia. And also the we could say the racial division between the nobles and the ska, that are the slaver class. We have to remind in this scenario that both, I said races because they are different races, but they were not always different races. They were both nobles and ska were once the same people, but as soon as the ruler got in power, he divided the society to in two parts. One, to work for them directly, that they were the nobles, and the second part of the society, that were the ones that uh, would work, that will work, uh, yeah, that would work, excuse me, for the nobles. So he divided in a strategy that is explained in the story, under this framework of understanding the villain uh, dilemma. It is explained why he decided to take the population and divided them into, and over a millennia, well, they got to have a genetical differences due to the harsh environment of this planet. Now we have the contemporary complexity, and how contemporary literature often rejects simplistic portrayals of heroes and villains. This uh, takes into account the villain psychology, their motivations, the complexity within the construction of these characters, also the diversity, uh, this idea of the or of authentic representations of disability, homosexuality, or sexual divergency, and of course the neurodivergency. For instance, the villains are given motivations rather than pure evil intentions. In terms of diversity, the characters are not defined exclusively by characters are not defined exclusively by their sexuality. Also, the disabilities are not portrayed as something that will automatically disappear or something that must disappear at all, uh, but they are portrayed as something that are part of the characters, uh, but they don't take the the main layer of the character construction. They happen to be characters with that happens to have a dysfunction or a disability, but not disabilities that have character. Also, the traumas remain meaningful. The traumas do not disappear. The traumas are elaborated. Uh, we get to see some growth or not, but we get to see the characters deal with these uh, conditions or avoid to deal with these conditions, and that could be part of the character arc. And last, the own author's background and how he has been open to explore different type of characters that get to question his own religious beliefs. To summarize, I will say that people are represented as complex individuals rather than stereotypes that walk around the stories. At last but not least, we have uh, the last characteristic that is speculative fiction. This idea of imaginary worlds that are used to explore real human questions. Um, through some point of view, we get to see what makes a good leader, for example, or for some epigraphs, we get to see the question around how power can corrupt a sort of fantasy is a tool that becomes a laboratory for examining the reality itself. So the author experiments with inequality, with injustice, with questions around responsibility. He also experiments with different psychological frameworks, how those frameworks may affect or not a character, which events could have could be portrayed in the story. There are traumatical events that are portrayed. So there is also the question that how does this change the character that is involved in these situations and so on. So to finish this presentation that happened to take more time than what I was expecting, maybe because I have read 90% of author's work along 25 novels. I will say 20 novels, maybe. And yeah, I had a lot of information that I didn't know how to place. I hope the analysis have been idoneous, I would say. Uh, and as a sort of conclusion, I would say that, well, the main arguments were the Cosmere has fragmentation, it has multiple perspectives, uh, dilemmas around identity, mental health issues, mental health experts uh, assessoring the author, social criticism around different institutions and around different social dynamics, power dynamics as well, and this speculative fiction of uh, how the author may produce hypotheses about any of the previously mentioned uh, characteristics. So I will conclude that that's why Brandon Sanderson is contemporary, because his work engaged with contemporary questions about identity, power, suffering, social structures, etc. And he used this human complexity while using also the narrative techniques of the contemporary movement, and how he interconnect all this fragmented universe that he has been building and will be building, hopefully, uh, in the future years. That was all. Thank you. If you happen to get to here, I hope you have listened to this in X2 speed, something like that. And that's all.